Hi everyone, Gundam here for 50th and brand new episode of our special edition Lore of the Universal Century. Today we're going back again to the 1 Year War era in an attempt to answer a particular question, which is... Yep, in this video we're going to explore the history of the Zik counterpart to the ball, its mechanical lore, variants, and extract every bit of mechanical knowledge we have on them so far. But let's start by the beginning. What is exactly the Oggo? Codenamed MP-02A, the Oggo, unfortunately nicknamed Zeon's trash can, was a mass-production mobile destroyer pod, deployed by the Principality of Zeon in the final stages of the 1 Year War. A new kind of decisive weapon urgently commissioned by the Principality Technical Headquarters in response to the brutal end of the Gravity Front in the Federation favor, the Oggo was a stark departure from any mobile technology previously designed by the Principality, clearly showcasing Zeon's weakened national power and early decline. Indeed, the Oggo was a surprising breakaway from the usual Zeon designing doctrine, which usually prioritized costly but high-performance mobile weapons, taking it as the form of a low-cost, easily pilotable and simplistic machine. Largely inspired by the mobile pod board deployed by the enemy Federation forces, the Oggo was thus this small combat pod meant to fill the ranks of the stretched Zeon space forces, using recycled features and equipments from the usual Zeon machines to achieve a more than decent space performance. First of all, the Oggo was equipped with the mono-eye sensor and generator of the Zaku-2J type, aka the former and now unneeded ground type, giving the small mobile pod excellent sensor range and detection capabilities, while also ensuring a top-notch power output for an object of its size. This mono-eye sensor was coupled with 5 additional cameras placed on the main body, giving the Oggo's pilot visual feedback similar to the one featured in regular mobile suits. In terms of firepower, the Oggo was designed to be able to make use of many Zeon standard weapons via specialized hardpoints, including the traditional 120mm machine gun, 280mm Zaku bazooka, 603 barrels rocket pod, or even the infamous Sturmfaust, thus granting it access to a large inbuilt arsenal far more diversified than the opposing balls. When it came to its cruising range and operating time, the Oggo was also leagues above the ball, with the particular form of its fuselage enabling it to carry not just large amount of fuel, but actually to carry 2 types of propellant. The Oggo indeed first made use of a heavy propellant, intended to be the standard helium-3 for high thrust maneuvers, while instead relying on regular hydrogen for lower speed cruising and idling. This second propulsion method, also granting high cruising range to the Oggo during operations, was actually a pre-requirement to make it even function, as the use of the Zaku-2J generator without its original cooling system forced the Oggo rocket engine to continuously idle to ensure its stability. Now, the Oggo wasn't just a pure mirror to the ball that was creating using leftover parts and with a high cruising range. The Zeon's mobile pod hiding a rather interesting technological edge in its sleeves. Indeed, the Oggo was built around what was called a drum frame, a very early ancestor of the movable and transformable frames, enabling the small and blockish mobile pod to switch configurations and adjust its form thanks to a sort of rotating inner structure. This rotating structure notably enabled the Oggo to switch between a cruising and assault form, enabling it to deploy manipulation pinchers for end-to-end combat or manutention duties, and fold them back when unneeded, something the ball could ever dream about. Aside this, the drum frame also piloted the angulation of all the Oggo's thrusters, giving it surprisingly high maneuverability for a mobile pod. Ice on the cake, the drum frame also enabled the movement of the weapon's hardpoints, meaning the Oggo could fire its weapons sideways or even backwards without having to slowly rotate them like the ball's cannon. With all these assets, the Oggo proved to be a fairly decent space weapon, super cheap and easy to field with rookie pilots, although by no means equal in performance to any kind of mobile suit, while still lagging behind the ball in some particular fields. Despite the technical headquarters' best hopes, the Oggo sadly never proved to be the decisive weapon they dreamt of to turn the tide of the war, with the Oggo eventually mainly serving as a grim coffin for many of Zeon's youth. The Oggo would however survive the war, continuing its existence for years to come, while also laying the basis for transformable technology thanks to research made on its drum frame. But that's enough setting for today, let's cover its lore. You're probably currently thinking that I was going to start with the traditional, the year is Universal Century 79 and the 1-year war was entering its final stages, the Oggo history starting fairly late into the 1-year war. However, this will not be the case, with the mobile pod actually tracing its early origins from around the start of the war, even earlier than its supposed inspiration, the mobile pod ball. As the 1-year war entered its early hours and the Principality of Zeon engaged in heinous and infamous Operation British, unleashing hordes of Zakus and Musai on the Federation forces, it is said that a smaller vehicle also participated in the operation on Zeon's side, a long unforgotten ancestor of our boy the Oggo. Labeled as the combat spacepod, this obscure machine is a total mystery, with its mechanical details and specs being entirely unknown and its existence outside of sightings during Operation British being, well, non-existent. Japanese sources consider these mobile pods to be possible early ancestor to the Oggo, and very likely early weaponized forms of the civilian spacepod, a concept the Federation would later refine with the Eric 76 project, which would later give birth to the ball. Some other sources instead theorize these mobile pods to be instead advanced version of the ZXA-1, aka the MBAC spacepod, the early mobile pod Zeon created and which served as the forefather of the Zaku series. Either way, how this combat spacepod directly related to the Oggo is unknown, but it at least shows that the concept of weaponized mobile pods existed in the mind of the Zeon military since the very early days of the war, much earlier than the balls, which only appeared in later June UC-79. As Operation British concluded with a Principality's victory, soon followed by another victory at the Battle of Loom, and later with the successful troop drops and the start of the Earth's invasion, the need for the Zeon combat pod very likely decreased drastically, which combined with the new frontline being on Earth and the massive R&D surge in mobile suit development, likely caused it to be discontinued or relegated to other tasks, soon disappearing like many other concepts such as the Gargoyle Destroyer or Southern Supply Shuttle. The idea of a support mobile pod would however soon emerge back in the mind of Zeon's engineers, with another related to the future Oggo appearing around March-April UC-79, but this time on a totally different environment. Known as the Rescue Chamber or Zeon Submersible, this new iteration of the Zik mobile pod line was a new creation from the Zaku Marine type development project, a small underwater vehicle to deploy as assistance for early stages amphibious mobile suits the project was working on. A sort of small yellowish submarine, the Rescue Chamber was a non-combat creation designed to perform field repairs on Yukon-class submarines or amphibious mobile suits, help the same suits to get up outside the submarine, while also, like its name indicates, help retrieve damaged suits, recovering the downed pilots in the process. To fulfill this role, the rescue chamber was made of a small cockpit encased in a single large ballast tank, using a regular glass window instead of a mono-eye, while also being outfitted with a pair of crude manipulator arms to perform repairs and transport material, used alongside additional flashlights for deep-sea salvaging. About its deployment history, it is known the rescue chamber participated some of the early tests of the Zaku Marine type as part of the Sea Serpent fleet, but was eventually discontinued despite amphibious mobile suit production skyrocketing after the Zaku Marine's failure. According to Advance of Zeta Reboot, the rescue chamber and the Oggo are direct relatives, which has been generally interpreted as the rescue chamber being a direct underwater version of the combat spacepod, with the later Oggo being only a modernized version of the combat spacepod, with the addition of the drum frame that the rescue chamber featured but in a cruder form. But let's now move to the proper start of the Oggo's development history. The month is now November UC-79, and the tide was starting to turn for the Principality of Zeon. After its defeat at the fateful Battle of Odessa, the Zeon Earth Attack Force was now a shell of its former self, leading to a massive retreat back to space as the operation concluded. With its major stronghold on Earth lost, the Earth invasion operation was definitely called off, with the Zeon forces regrouping back to space around the Solomon Fortress, waiting for the Federation's counter-offensive. With Odessa lost and Luna 2 and Jaburu pumping out dozens of new capital ships alongside hundreds of new gym mobile suits and mobile pod balls for the Federation, the Principality of Zeon top brass realized a new shift in the balance of power and the drastic measure that would need to be taken for the Principality's survival. Indeed, Zeon was now in need of a new type of decisive space weapon, a weapon that could be quickly designed and deployed and produced in mass as soon as possible, with the idea being to have something to dampen a bit the Federation/Zeon manpower difference, being estimated around 3-1 for the incoming space campaign. The core idea was just to match the Federation massive sheer numbers with as many pilots as possible, even as young as 16 years old, something that could be not realistically be achieved by assigning even mere Zakus to everyone, because of training time requirements and of course too high manufacturing costs. To fulfill such need, a new machine was thus absolutely required, with additional challenges needing to be overcome first. First of all, alongside requiring being cheap to produce, easy to repair, easy to pilot and easy to transport, the new mobile weapon would also need to blend with the hundreds of other Zeon development projects that plague Zeon war efforts already, with many of them, like the MS-11 or High Mobility Zaku project, being already several months senior, thus gaining priority for new assembling lines and overall funding. This new decisive weapon project was eventually overseen by the Principality's famous military technical headquarters, with a core group of engineers and officials based on Site 3 finding a way to make this project come to the light of the day. Under their direction, the decisive weapon ditched the idea of being even a cheap mobile suit, taking instead the form of a new kind of mobile pod, directly in emulation of what the Federation was also doing with the mobile pod ball, the infamous MP-02A Oggo. To overcome the various challenges the project faced, the technical headquarters resorted to an intelligent idea to carve the Oggo a place in the messy Zeon production effort, designing it to emphasize compatibility with standard Zeon weapons instead of coming with its own signature assets. Aside the Zaku 2J type generator and mono eye, it is also considered the Oggo directly recycled the picture arms of a work pod, which may have been the combat space pod we mentioned earlier. Once designed, the Oggo was immediately put to production by the technical headquarters, resulting in a first prototype being finalized around late November UC79. In spite of proper procedure, the Oggo wasn't hastily adopted, with its mass production plan being approved, with neither proper verifications to its technology, nor any kind of field or even proper standard testing. In a matter of days, the Oggo's production was standardized in a botched manner, with Zaku assembling plants being diverted to produce the newly created mobile pod. Although the total numbers of Oggos produced is unknown, it is known a batch of 34 units were delivered in late December by the technical headquarters on their test ship the Jotunheim, being deployed with cadets at their helm against Federation forces mere days before the Battle of Abawaku. This first baptism by fire, done under the guise of regular testing, resulted in the Oggo squad going against a group of enemy balls, dogfighting each other across the moon. During the fight, around 6 balls were lost by the Federation for only 2 Oggos on the Zeon side, revealing the Zeke mobile pod performance over its Federation counterpart, but also its poor and hastily approved engineering. Indeed, the rotating drum frame proved to be prone to malfunctions, as did many of its internal components, severely hindering the Oggo's performance, while also making it a very easy target for Federation mobile suits. Despite this, the technical headquarters already considered the technology good to be deployed, with the 32 remaining units continuing their live testing the following day, but this time during the nightmarish Battle of Abawaku. Despite the help of support platforms designed to scatter and resupply them, like the Mobile Armor Big Rank and the Oggo launch platform, these units would suffer great casualties across the E-fields they protected, with only 9 of them surviving the fateful battle ending the 1-year war. Aside this famous batch of units, it is known the technical headquarters also deployed various Oggo groups across the front line by late November and December, although by no means in large enough quantities to achieve the manpower dampening effects they were created for in the first place. The Oggo was overall met with mockery and skepticism by both Zeon and Federation soldiers alike, with the Zeon pilots considering the design a downgrade over regular mobile suits, and the Federation soldier instead seeing it as a bad copy of the mobile pod ball, the Zeke trash can. Because of this, many Zeon soldiers never fielded the Oggos they were given, instead relegating them to manual duties or sometimes using them for more surprising things. Among such surprising uses was notably the integration of one into the Gelgoog Heinkel Butz custom, with Chimera Corps Ace Heinkel Butz recycling a whole Oggo that entered the group possession to modify his personal mobile suit. A highly customized Gelgoog eye mobility type, coming with a unique egg design, the Heinkel Butz custom main addition was its use of an unfortunate Oggo as its new backpack, seemingly mutilating it of its pinchers to pair with a couple of Gatling cannons. These Gatlings could then be handled by the Gelgoog as its main inbuilt weapons, while using the entire fuselage of the poor Oggo as an ammunition reserve, enabling the Gelgoog to unleash powerful bullet volleys without risk of depleting its ammo too soon during combat. This Gelgoog would be used alongside other Chimera Corps machines in an attempt to capture Shin Matsunaga, first with an ambush in the Corregidor sector, then inside Tree itself, where the Heinkel Butz custom would confront Matsunaga Gelgoog Jaeger. During that combat, the Jaeger would end up damaging the custom Gelgoog, destroying its back Oggo and thus depriving it of the large magazine pod for its Gatlings. But enough Oggo abuse, let's go back to our standalone mobile pod. After the conclusion of the 1-year war, the Oggo, much like many other Zeon's machines, would continue its use in the ranks of various Zeon remnant groups, with some pods even falling in the hands of unrelated anti-Earth Federation resistant movements. Of all the Zeon remnant groups that would continue using the Oggo, the largest and most famously known would be the one based in the Axis Space Fortress, with Axis Zeon making extensive use of the small mobile pods during its early years. Those Axis-owned Oggos were most likely produced locally within the asteroid factories rather than being original salvage units, with Axis being in the possession of large amount of these vehicles, even painting them in a different salmon color scheme. As a result, it is likely those Axis Oggos made use of different recycled parts than their 1-year war variant, dumping the Zakuto J generator and Mono Eye, a ground model absent totally in Axis, for Zakuto FZ or F2 parts. Those units would be extensively used for asteroid mining and repair, and would remain in use up until the First Neo-Zeon War, being deployed during the Battle of Axis to set up Phaeton Ray Argy's anti-solar system super weapon. Aside using the Oggo as a work pod, Axis R&D departments would also carry on extensive research on its design and especially its drum frame, first to develop new generation of mobile pods, but also eventually to serve as the basis for a new series of military mobile suits, the Gaza line. The first step of this family was the MMT-01 Gaza-A, a new type of mobile pod designed to not only perform manutention on the Axis and Musa asteroids, but also serve as a possible bridgehead for a future machine aimed at military expansion. Inheriting the salmon colors and drum frame of the Axis version of the Oggo, the Gaza-A took the form of a rather sophisticated mobile pod, featuring a 3-set of advanced claw arms, multiple mono eyes instead of exposed sensors, and even shield binders to protect the fragile Oggo-derived frame. The new advanced claw arms, redesigned from the Oggos, were of a high degree of technological quality, being far more suited for extensive repair and object manipulations, but also coming with the option of serving as functional legs, enabling the Gaza-A to stand like a crude type of mobile suit. Because of its features, the Gaza-A was eventually seen as an excellent machine by the Axis top leadership, notably thanks to its drum frame making it a mix of mobile suit and mobile armor rather than a simple work pod. The Gaza-A would then be rechristened as the AMX-001, the first mobile weapon of Axis Zeon, and continue over the years being refined and redesigned, leading to the eventual creation of its successor, the AMX-002 Gaza-B. A crude mobile suit designed around UC-82 to add simple armaments and more traditional features to the Gaza-A technology, the Gaza-B was a timid attempt at transitioning the Gaza-A into a fully fledged mobile suit, while also trying to keep its core technology, thus its ability to transform thanks to the Oggo-derived drum frame. The Gaza-B would eventually start its life as a worker mobile suit, but would be quickly reassigned as a military model as soon as Axis set its sights toward returning to the Earth sphere in the future. The Gaza-B would later be redesigned into the infamously known pink gremlin, AMX-003 Gaza-C, but that's a story for another day. Aside using the Gaza-A for their own use, Axis would also give some of them to their Zeon Mars allies, with the Martian movement using the unorthodox design of the work pod to craft a new entry to the future Gaza-series, the Gaza-M or Marine type, which would, amongst other parts, reuse old Oggo manipulator arms for its pinchers. Unfortunately, that is also a story for another day. Time for you to beg in the comments for a full Gaza video in the future. With this video comes to an end. Marco and Code out.
But who will survive?